Welcome, everyone. My name is Susan Patterson, and I am the host for this YouTube channel, Winning the Fight Against Human Trafficking and Child Exploitation. In this video, you will hear from Pastor Dan Broyles, who together with a group of people started a community-based task force. This is an important video as community-based task forces are key to ending human trafficking. If you are looking for what you can do about human trafficking, check out our channel, where you can find lots of videos like this, and the link for our channel is in the video description below. You can also find the links for all the organizations Pastor Dan mentioned, as well as our website link where we list the types of events Dan was referring to. Please support our work by subscribing to this channel and liking this video. Let's join Dan now. I'm so excited today to have Pastor Dan Broyles, who has made a huge impact in his community with regard to anti-human trafficking efforts. And what we're going to talk about today is the community task force he and a few of the people in the anti-human trafficking community started with him, and the difference that community task force makes. So Dan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm just looking forward to sharing about this, and it's a blessing to be with you.
Well, thank you. Now, how did you know God was calling you to start a community-based anti-human trafficking task force?
Well, it started that when I was on actually a different community task force in our city. So our city had sponsored, it's called the Blue Ribbon Task Force many years ago. And we actually had a guest speaker from an organization called Zoe, and they do amazing trafficking ministry in Thailand and all over the world, actually. So they came in, pretty much did like a 5-10 minute presentation for us. And there was a colleague of mine from our local college who heard that, and I heard that. And we, after hearing it, we actually had to say, we have to do something. We can't be silent.
Yes.
It's kind of like if your neighbor across the street, if you walk outside to get your mail and you notice there's smoke coming out of not the chimney, but some part of the house, and you know this family has kids, you don't walk back in to watch TV. You have to do something.
Yes.
You either have to go to that house, you have to call 911, you have, and that's, I think, how we felt. My colleague and I, Larry Shallard is his name, and we literally met, I think, for lunch, and like, we have to do something. And so it wasn't fitting in with the niche of the task force, but the local city one. So we pretty much said, we're gonna do something. Let's get together, bring some community partners and people we already have relationships with and trust, and let's figure out something to do, because we, just like that fire across the street, we can't be passive. It would be wrong to go back in your house and watch TV while the smoke continues to rise with your neighbor.
Yes, that is so well said. I think everyone who's part of the anti-human trafficking movement feels that way. Like, how can we look the other way when children, especially children, are being brutalized in this way? It's, I mean, horrific. So why don't you share with us the difference between an anti-human trafficking community-based task force, which you created, and one created by a government agency, usually law enforcement or nonprofit or like that. So go ahead.
So the one that I help lead really is far more about networking and educating. Our goal is really to educate the community, professionals about the signs and to notice things, versus a lot of government task forces, you know, the local sheriffs along with the FBI or all the law enforcement, and those are really valuable, and we're not trying to take the place of those or replace those whatsoever. Our goal is really even to dismiss this myth that trafficking is something that only happens in other countries.
Yes.
It's not happening here. I just think if you ask the average person in the United States, they're gonna like, what, here still? Or they think it's such a rare exception. And so it's so easily dismissed. And so when we gather together, we gather people from our local school districts, from nonprofits, Department of Mental Health, our local junior college, churches, actual agencies that are doing direct help for victims of trafficking. And we all kind of literally got together in a room and said, what are we gonna do? And the great thing is, I've grown up in my community. I've been here since junior high, actually. And I was a social worker before I was a pastor. And so there's a lot of contacts there. And then the person who joined me was the lead counselor for the counseling center at our local junior college. And so we already had community relationships with people. So we just put up the word out there to people we kind of knew and trust, and really kind of present the same thing, like saying we have to do something. And it's amazing how sometimes in communities, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing.
Yes.
Right. If a nonprofit on this side of town is doing something, does the school districts know about it? Does some of the other nonprofits even know about it? And often the answer was no. So part of it was just figuring out, how do we communicate with each other, and how do we even grow in being educated ourselves?
Very good. Now, I know that with regard to education, you're having a event to educate medical professionals, which, why don't you share with us why you think that's important?
Sure. Yeah, so on May 24th of 2021, we're having a one-time training to train the medical community, whether you work for EMT, a nurse, urgent care, whatever your kind of role is, to know the signs, because of all professionals in our community, the medical community is the top community that will see a victim of trafficking.
Yes.
They are the top connection that will happen. But it's tragic that a victim will come and see someone at an urgent care or a women's clinic or ER room or whatever it is, and the professional has no idea. Because often victims don't even self-identify as victims. And so this happened at a different hospital in Los Angeles County where they did training, and the very next week they identified victims. The very next week,
right,
some of these ER nurses all of a sudden had a different lens, and they're like, wait a second. And so we just think training the medical community is important as almost any community. It's important for all communities, whether people work in the hotel business, airlines, across all sectors, to know the signs, because it's happening all around us. But
yes,
it's so subtle that often we don't know. I mean, it was tragic. There was some friends of mine that flew out to I won't say a city on the East Coast for a unique training on trafficking. And at the very hotel we stayed at, there were signs of trafficking at the hotel happening the same time as our conference.
Right.
So what's happening is going on all the time. And we really want to care for the medical community, because the education is not caught up with the need.
It hasn't.
It hasn't caught up with it at all.
And I think the statistic is, wherever you look, it's like 95% or 99% of victims at some point will make contact with a medical professional. So what you're doing is huge. And I know you're going to be recording it, right?
Yes.
Yes.
It's going to be online. It's going to be for anybody online. And the great thing is we're providing continuing education for EMTs and nurses.
Very good.
So that's a draw too, to get professionals there.
Yes, absolutely.
And we're working at getting actually the possibility of doing the same thing for marriage family therapists or licensed social workers. And so sometimes professionals don't even know how much training they need.
Yes.
Because, I've been doing this for 20 years and I haven't had anybody. Are you sure is this really that big?
Yes, exactly. I hear that all the time, because they don't, like you said, they don't self-identify. There's this assumption they're going to walk in and go, I'm a victim of human trafficking, help me. But that is not at all what happens, right?
Yeah, and so we're trying to change the lens so people notice things differently.
Right.
It actually reminds me of a friend of mine who was a licensed marriage family therapist. And she'd had her normal private practice and she would meet with couples, but she decided she wanted to specialize in healthy sexuality for couples. She wanted to get some extra training beyond her master's degree. And so she decided to do something different. At the end of the first session only, she would say, you know what, I know we can't get to everything in the very first week. However, if something else that you want to talk about regarding your relationship, your communication, or your sexuality, she threw that piece in there, feel free to bring it up next week, because we can't cover everything in 1 week. And she said it was amazing how much areas of sexuality came up in week 2. She said, I had a 50% growth of couples that now wanted to talk about sex in their private time.
Wow.
And all it was is a tiny bit of awareness that told the client, I'm aware of this and I notice it. So it's amazing how when we change our lens as even professionals, it'll change how we see people and the needs of people around us.
Very good. Now, other than education and networking, is there anything else that happens at these community task force meetings?
Well, part of it also, it influences leaders of these organizations to make a difference within their own organization. So for instance, my colleague that I mentioned, his name's Larry, he now himself and some of the people that work with him know the signs at the college. And so what happens, it's actually infiltrating the college to be more aware. And so in the last 5 years since this group has been meeting, he says, we've actually now identified victims of trafficking within our own college that we would have never seen before.
Wow, that's outstanding.
So we would have just seen them as maybe a sexual addiction or a prostitute issue or all these type of things, when really they were being taken advantage of.
Yes.
Right. And a number of the victims have a lot of hurts in their life. And I know in LA County, approximately 70 to 80% of those who are trafficked have a foster care background. So they don't even know often what healthy relationships are. So,
yes.
And part of it is then once a year, this group puts on a community training for the community, for parents, of knowing the signs and how to protect your kids online. And so we had an online version this past year because of COVID, but before that we would have anywhere from probably 200 to 400 people come to a conference.
Wow.
Every year in person, and we would invite a survivor to tell their story on how they were trafficked right here, often here in LA County. And it just kind of, again, breaks that myth that this isn't something in a third world country. So that's something that we're going to continue to do, a once a year kind of push. Our local college of the Canyons, has actually been willing to often sponsor even financially to pay for speakers, because whenever we have a survivor speak, we want to be so respectful of him or her to pay them and not just assume they'll say yes. We always want to be so respectful for them to be vulnerable to share their story. So that's one thing. Another thing that's come out of this, out of our college, is our college has non-credit classes. And so we were able to work with this to actually now 2 to 3 times a year provide free classes about kind of human trafficking 101 for anybody in the community. And the college actually pays a professor to teach that. So it's a quality professor, but anybody can attend that for free. So we have some coming up here like the end of this month in April, and we'll continue to provide that for the community 2 to 3 times a year.
Very good. And I think it's important to note that on college campuses, the way these human traffickers are often approaching these kids is this is a way to pay for college, only they get into it, they're trapped, and they never see the money.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine who was at a university here in Los Angeles, and she approached a professor that should she go into stripping, which all that world bleeds into trafficking. It all bleeds into it, and it's amazing how much that's all connected. And the professor said, yeah, why don't you? I mean, what's the big deal?
Oh my God.
Financially, it'll help you, and it'll give you a sense of freedom, which was such a lie. It does the opposite.
Right.
And then guess who showed up at the strip club later?
The professor.
The professor from the university.
Yes.
And so it's really tragic because often there's this false sense of you'll have freedom in kind of those industries, whether it's that or even the area of like pornography and all that, when really that's really interconnected often with the sex trafficking. So it's really tragic because from what I've read and people I've really trusted, there's an organization in Southern California called Treasures.
Yes.
With a good friend of mine. I used to be on her board. harmony. And she said almost always the women involved in those industries have past sexual abuse.
Yes.
And how much that has impact on women moving forward into their teenage and young adult years.
Yes.
So what happens is boundaries are crossed earlier in those years, and now they get crossed later in years. And unfortunately, perpetrators know how to pick up on that.
Yes.
They know how to, they're
Yes.
really skilled on noticing. I mean, it can be young men, but mostly women who lack boundaries, right? And really they know how to groom them. So it's really tragic. And so again, part of what our hope to do is even like go into like a boys and girls club and train their staff. We've done those type of things.
Good
Again,
for you.
with vulnerable youth, or we've done specific trainings for the school counselors at our local school districts. Because if a school counselor graduated, let's say from the degree 10 years ago, they had zero training on knowing the signs. Zero. So now they're having literally youth go to their high school or junior high being trafficked. They might even meet with that school counselor. The school counselor still doesn't know the signs. Because 10 years ago, there was no training on it. It wasn't happening. It's barely just starting to happen.
Yes. Yes. What you're talking about is so exciting. And one thing I want to make sure the audience knows is that you're doing all of this while still pastoring a church, right?
Yeah. So my job still is a care pastor at a church, and we do kind of lay counseling called spiritual care and support groups. But I just feel I'm really blessed by the church. I have freedom. They want me involved in the community, not just to kind of within our four walls of our kind of church building. But I just think part of living out your faith is being in the community. I think that's what God wants us to do.
Yes.
I really think that's what Christ did. Christ didn't only have holy huddles with the 12 disciples.
Yes.
He was out there with vulnerable people, and actually vulnerable people were attracted to him.
Yes.
They were drawn to him, and he went towards them. And so I just think that's such an important thing to do, and living out your faith. And even if it's messy, even if it's complicated, they need the love of God as much as anybody else.
Yes. And what I've run into, and I've worked with scores of churches to set up anti-human trafficking efforts, what I found is they really have a heart, but they don't know what to do.
They know where to start.
Yes, where to start. So this is where education is so important. And, you know, my commitment has been, my passion is showing churches what they can do, because it's such a great resource. They have such a great heart, and God is on our side. And this is truly an evil that needs to be overcome.
Yeah.
So, right, go ahead.
And I would say if you're part of a church and you're not sure where to start, I would say, go meet with people who already are involved.
Yes.
Get connected with them. Go take them to coffee. Go do a Zoom call with them. Be intentional. Don't wait for people to come to you. I get teased sometimes by some of the staff where I work that I invite myself over to people's lives. And so like there's amazing organizations out there. So for instance, like International Justice Mission.
Yes.
Is in multiple countries around the world that want to work with churches.
Yes.
I actually have a friend of mine that's his whole job is to do church engagement. I also worked with an organization called Connect to the number 2 Ministries that actually sends teams to Haiti to work with kids with disabilities and kids who have been trafficked. I've been down there many times to do trainings. Haiti has 300,000 trafficked children.
Wow.
Right, 300,000. And so my friend and his team has built orphanages for these kids to have a safe place now to go. And so there's tons of stuff out there that just find out what's in your area, in your city, in your county, and go build relationships. Don't just read about it online, about some article. That's great. It's a great place to start. On the Polaris Project, it's a great place to read online. Go read about that stuff. But go build relationships that people are already kind of in the trenches or know more about it than you do. If you just Google trafficking kind of support in my area or agencies or nonprofits, something will pop up probably if you live in a medium to large size city now, and go get connected. Well, one of the things that churches can really do to make a difference in this area is to really help families and encourage families to become foster parents and be involved in the foster care system. So LA County is the largest child welfare system in the world. And there's so many churches right here in LA County that if one church just had one or two families within that church become a foster family, that's a solid family, that would make such a difference. And that's preventative work. But I would say most people out there, when you say foster care, they hear fear, their anxiety. And I would say if you want to be a foster parent, just don't do it alone. Get support. Don't do it alone. But it's so worth it. The foster parents that kind of quit after a year are the ones that just do it alone independently and get no support. They don't ask help from their friends or from their church. The ones that do it long term and find the greatest joy in it have a team of people they connect with, sometimes for a meal, a ride, financial help, whatever it is. And so I just think that actually the Bible is actually full of examples of other people taking care of not their biological kids. You actually could say that Moses, was in foster care with Pharaoh's family. You could say that, Esther was in a relative caregiver's home. So, and actually anybody who's a Christian has an adoption story through God. So part of this is not just to be nice, but living out our faith, but not making a decision out of fear. And there's so many things that people think they have to have this amazing house to be a foster parent, or they have to be married. And those just things are not true. The biggest step is willingness to at least start the process or start praying about it, or just go to an interest meeting. And so another kind of resource out there that's fairly new that I think is really neat is called the Nehemiah Project. Mm-hmm. And I just talked to them recently about how they are trying to find, I would say, couples who have already launched their kids, who actually have 2 or 3 bedrooms kind of free in their house, who would be willing to take in an emancipated foster youth. And there's not all the red tape of becoming a foster parent because they're not a minor. And now they're actually going to they'll have a social worker to help you if there's any concerns. And the reason why this is so vital, I just talked to someone from Care Portal, and they were saying that the traffickers are doing this themselves. They are actually
I'm not surprised to hear that, because within 6 months, half become homeless.
Yeah, so they're going to this vulnerable 19-year-old who's on the verge of being homeless and say, hey, we'll rent you a room, we'll help you out. And then they start trapping her, right? With the fear, the threats. She gets pulled in to having to do sexual favors and to pay the rent, all the crazy stuff that goes on in the trafficking world. And they've trapped her, and she has no family to go to. And so the Nehemiah Project wants to provide options, because a lot of the 18, 19, 20-year-olds can't afford your typical apartment in our area, at least in Los Angeles County. Yes. And so I know, like where I'm at in kind of northern LA County, there are so many people, I would say probably in, let's say, their 50s or so, who kids are maybe in their other 20s, who live in a 4-bedroom house and it's just the 2 of them, and who don't have to rent it for a bunch of financial need, but they might be willing to do it if they have the support of a social worker if any concerns come up, because these young adults get screened too. So there's a lot of things that churches can do like that, but part of the challenge is the average even staff member at churches doesn't know about the Nehemiah Project, or doesn't know about International Justice Mission or whatever, or even foster care agencies that are going on out there. And so part of it is just being really intentional. And I would say just continue to be curious long-term about what's going on in your own community.
Yes, that's outstanding. We'll have to have you back again, Dan. Obviously, you have so much to contribute because of your experience in this. And that's really the purpose of this YouTube channel, is to support people who want to do something to connect, so to speak, virtually with people like you and get ideas about what they can do. And for me, community task forces are really the key to ending human trafficking. Absolutely. So is there anything you want to add about community task forces before we complete today?
I would just say, don't wait. Don't wait till you have all the answers. I didn't have all the answers when I started. There was a lot of things I'm learning along the way, but I would say do something. Don't be a perfectionistic about it. Don't wait till all the people around you support you from your church. I would say go connect and do something and start really small. It literally could be a few moms getting together just to pray for the foster kids in your community.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be, you have to go start a nonprofit.
Right.
It literally could be a few people go, we're going to find a foster family in our church and just support them by babysitting or bringing them a meal once a month. So I love your concept, Susan, of promoting these community connections, coalitions, or task force. But some of you are like, that's a little overwhelming. So start somewhere by just building some relationship. Find someone in your school district who has a passion for this, who you could talk to. Is there a school counselor or social worker or principal who's like, I'm interested in this, I'd like to know more? And just start building slow relationships with people you already know. I would say just start small and just see where God leads.
Very good. That's awesome. Thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you so much.